Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations with Agape. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephanie, who will share her insights on navigating media through a Catholic lens. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. I'll now turn off my screen and we'll join you again at the end of this session. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights today.
Oh, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Van Koevering, and I am a PR practitioner in Lansing, Michigan, and also I have taught high school journalism. So I do spend a fair amount of time thinking about everything that we are going to discuss today and trying to help students and adults alike understand where the truth is. Are you able to see this screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So to begin with, I want to bring us back to a little bit of C.S. Lewis. In The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis writes about how objective truth and moral relativism, the lack of objective truth, actually threaten humanity. And so one of the fellows at the C.S. Lewis Institute, Arthur Lindsley, has said that the most important issue for the culture and the church in the 21st century is the issue of truth. And unfortunately, the truth is getting a little bit harder to discern and identify in the modern world. So we're going to talk today about how to discern what is true in the media and how to find direction and peace in a world where each of us is bombarded with information. According to the New York Times, each of us sees 100,000 words a day. And it makes it very challenging to be able to go forward in ways that make sense. So, as always, we have to begin with our context. We have to know where we are in our place in history. Right now, unfortunately, we are a church in decline. I've put a cover of a very important book off to the right. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you pick it up. It defines the difference between operating in a state of Christendom, which is where we were at the founding of the United States, and a lot of other Western institutions and cultural values. Christendom is where we are. Christendom is widely accepted. Everybody knows what it is, and we tend to think in that mindset. Unfortunately, we are now moving back to almost where we were at the time of the Acts of the Apostles. We have a fragmented society. We have a celebration of vice and not virtue. And the truth is blurry. And so we now are having to imagine a new way of living and speaking and discerning. And that is as the apostles did, thousands of years ago. So as we begin thinking about this, we need to think about Matthew 10, which is really our guide for discernment and for life at this point. Entering a house, we wish it peace. If it is worthy, let your peace come upon it, and if not, let your peace return to you. Whoever will not receive you or listen to your words, go outside that house or town and shake the dust from your feet. That feels particularly relevant right now. Nothing is concealed that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not be known. This is where we need to begin as we consider our approach to the truth. So, how do we know what is true and what isn't? I always start with a car accident, and this image is just perfect for it. We all have a big T truth, that the sky is blue, the gravity works, that we have, if you throw a rock at a window, the window will likely break. These are big T truths that both the man and woman in this picture can probably agree on, no matter what their backgrounds are. There's also little T truth, and that's what this man has in his mind as he contemplates how this accident occurred. The woman in the orange sweater also has a little T truth. Together, if they worked out their thoughts long enough, or maybe there was a camera nearby, they'd be able to put their little T truths together into something that is the big T truth. But unfortunately, we live in a world where the media doesn't care about the big T truth at all. It only cares about the conflict between the two little t's. because conflict is essential to sell newspapers or get clicks on a digital media post. The conflict has been essential since 1690, when the first newspaper was published in the United States. We saw it grow during the days of William Randolph Hearst and the yellow journalism. They just make stuff up, throw it in the newspaper, make it as scandalous and crazy as possible, and people would buy the paper. Of course, in journalism, in proper journalism, there were some rules and standards that were adopted in 1923. And those standards have largely held over the years. They say that these standards indicate that a reporter needs to look at both sides of an issue. It needs to write a balanced article so that a reader can make up its mind. And that's how we have basically operated through the 80s and the 90s. In fact, journalism and the truth-telling power of journalism was so powerful that during the Watergate era, the work of two reporters was actually able to topple a presidency. And that's because people believed in the press more than they believed in what they were hearing from the White House. This is all now changing. Today's reporters are not as interested in the big T truth as they are in setting up those little T truths from that car accident. And so what we are seeing now is almost a crowdsourcing of the news. We spoke recently with a reporter or an editor, publisher here in Michigan, that said that in order for a newspaper to cover an issue, they would maybe run an op-ed about that issue. And then they would see how much feedback that op-ed got. And if there was a lot of back and forth and conflict in those comments from readers, then they would consider doing a news article about that issue. And then similarly, if there was a lot of comments and conflicts in those comments, then they would go back and do an editorial on the issue. So it's really about clicks, it's about selling papers, and it's about making sure that the story is as big and exciting and dramatic as a newspaper can make it. Now, into that general way of professional journalism, we are seeing some worrisome trends. About 1 in 5 of U.S. adults today say they are getting their political news primarily through social media. That is increasingly alarming. The younger the reader, the more likely this is to be true. So if you are thinking that the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal are the primary source of news today, even CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, that's not the case. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all of these places are becoming primary sources for a lot of Americans. And there's no regulation on those sources. There's nothing to say that I can't type whatever I feel like and then have that be the truth with a capital T for a lot of people. And so we expect this trend to continue to grow. As you can see, it dipped a little bit in 2022, 23, but it's back up in 2024, and it will continue to rise as things go forward. Oops, apologies, let me go back. Every year, the Gallup panel does a list of the most and least trusted professions. And I wanted you to see this because it's very informative. The most highly trusted profession by about 85% in America today is nurses. They rank above doctors, interestingly. Pharmacists are right up there. So healthcare is right at the top. High school teachers, also very high, 60%. Police officers and accountants. Clergy rank way down here. In fact, at 37%, clergy are below half of the top and closer, much closer to car salespeople and members of Congress. This is a concern for us. And we need to look at that and figure out what the answers are. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Journalists are evenly split, 50-50. And I would argue that after the 2024 election results, we are going to see this group sink still further. So when you are considering what you're hearing, you always have to consider the source. Just because a nurse says it doesn't mean that it's true. A lot of nurses take to social media and say a lot of things. And we don't have as much clergy on, though that number is growing. But even that is really hard. I belong to a Facebook group that asks a priest, and asking those priests is kind of a mixed bag as well. So you have to be very, very careful and consider the source. Now, let's look at some of the threats. Social media rumors are a huge threat. We're going to look at an example of that in a moment. Those rumors can start and take hold and exist in perpetuity. Biased reporting is also a threat that we have to be aware of. We need to be aware of the inflammatory language that is used. If you tune to Fox News for an hour, and then you go back and you tune to MSNBC for an hour, you're going to hear two totally different pictures of what the world looks like. And it's that kind of separation that can actually damage relationships, hurt families, and get in the way of what is big T truth. Marketing tactics are also very important for you to be aware of. There are a lot of things that we can do as public relations professionals that will target information to you based on where you shop, where you do business, what your job is. There is a wealth of information called big data behind the scenes, and that big data allows us to know an awful lot of information about individual people, and then target messaging toward them that we think they will end up responding well to. This results in each of us living in sort of an echo chamber. If say I'm a left-wing liberal, I watch Rachel Maddow every day. I go on, my social media, and I follow all of the same people who think the way that I do. And then I have marketing information coming in at me because they know that I'm a progressive Democrat. Then I'm in an echo chamber of my own and others' makings. And that's really, really concerning, because what I think we are finding in America today is that we are living in a cold civil war where, we have brother against brother, and these things are being fought out at Thanksgiving dinner tables rather than in trenches. But we need to be very concerned about the impact that this has on our society and on our faith relationships. I'm also going to jump out of here right now and talk to you a little bit about deepfakes.
What's up, Internet? I'm north of the border, eh? At the TED conference. It's not short for Theodore, but nobody calls me Thomas, so it's cool. It's Tom at TED. Yes, Canada. Seriously, though, everybody here, very nice, very polite. Especially the whales.
That is not Tom Cruise. That is a gentleman known as Deepfake Tom Cruise. And he has created a series of videos where he does all this stuff as Tom Cruise. There are a lot of deepfakes out there. And so it almost is impossible to understand what you are seeing with your own eyes and hearing with your own ears. And so that deepfake capacity is something that we have to be quite concerned about. It's also concerning from the other side. So if we think back to last summer, and when we saw lots of clips of President Biden appearing to wander, appearing to have difficulty knowing where he was going, his press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, attributed that to deepfake video. Now, in hindsight, we know that maybe that wasn't deepfake, but again, it's another effort to disentangle us from the truth. Okay, so let's talk about some of this and how this can happen. Let's start. This is a pretty silly one, but it's serious. On TikTok in 2022, somebody posted a video about Disney lowering its drinking age to 18. And it caught fire. A lot of people were watching it. It showed up in everybody's For You page. And so pretty quick, the news picked up on it. And so ABC 10 in Florida ran a story about Disney lowering the drinking age to 18. And then that further went to a whole big website called Mousetrap, which is where they share Disney news and information with a lot of folks. And it's still, if you go out and you Google Disney lowering drinking age to 18, there's still an awful lot of stuff that makes it look like that is actually happening. It's not. So as a responsible citizen, you have to be able to fact check almost everything you hear, whether it's good or bad. You need to make sure that you are on solid footing with the capital T truth before you talk about it with any other person. We've seen this a lot with the misrepresentation of Pope Francis's statements. We have seen a lot of headlines and posts that take his words out of context to suggest some pretty radical changes in church doctrine, such as the blessing of same-sex unions as sacramental marriages. This isn't true. Pope Francis is kind of a funny guy. He's like your uncle that you can't take to a party because you don't know exactly what he is going to say. But it's very much something that you need to fact check, and you need to go back before you decide that he is a good pope, a bad pope, or that church teaching has somehow changed. It may or may not have actually done so. So we need to make sure that we are pursuing the real truth in the words of the church, and that we also are not allowing ourselves to be distracted by false narratives that can occur. The church is the easiest way to look at this. If you see something that is confusing or concerning to you, obviously look to official Vatican communications, look to the Catholic media for clarification. If you encounter misinformation, if somebody across the Christmas dinner table from you says something about the way the Pope is so awesome because now he's welcoming homosexuals into the life of the church through sacramental marriage, you need to figure out how you're going to correct that in a way that is loving and authentic. That's the hardest part of all. So we turn again to Catholic social teaching. We have to recognize that every individual is made in the image of God, and we need to share information that respects their inherent dignity. We need to foster unity and concern for the common good. It's not worth fighting, but we do want to avoid spreading divisive or misleading narratives. And we want to amplify the voices of the marginalized and questions media that ignores or misrepresents their needs. And lastly, we need to engage in media discussions actively and ethically to promote justice and truth. I'll give you a little example of this. The Olympic opening ceremonies last summer with what appeared to be a very pagan demonstration of the Last Supper. It was there was a lot of chatter online on social media about that display. And I have a family member who is a Protestant member of the clergy who believed that it was loving and inclusive and definitely worth having that display. And I did not. And I chose to believe the viewing of my own eyes. And I chose to engage on social media about this. I tried to do so in a loving way, but in a way that did not violate my intent to share what the truth is about that. I was accused of clutching my pearls. That's the big accusation that you get from a lot of people on the left. And I announced that I would keep my pearls firmly in hand. I'm not afraid of that. What I am afraid of is a society that rejects the truth of not just factual information, but information about people's beliefs and misrepresents those in ways that are toxic. So as all of us, before we comment online, before we argue with somebody at the dinner table, we need to evaluate sources carefully. We need to know who created the content and what the purpose of it is. There are resources online. There's a website called Snope that allows you to go out and double check truth. You can also go back out. If you get a news piece from MSNBC, double check it on somebody on the opposite side of the political spectrum. Avoid gossip, avoid falsehoods. always, always verify your content and refuse to share content that is harmful. And use prayer. Pray for the wisdom to discern the truth and reflect on how media messages align with your own gospel values as taught by the church. And always advocate for ethical media practices. Support the media that promotes integrity, justice, and so forth. And then finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. This, in a nutshell, is a call to all of us to discern where are the good news sources, where are the good places we can go to get information, and how can we share information in ways that is loving and responsible and thoughtful for all. So with that, I am open to questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that. That's incredibly insightful, so I appreciate it. I do have one question that we got from the registration list from Connie from Tennessee. And you, of course, touched on this, but to give a shorter answer that she can share, her question was, when I share religious sources with non-religious people, they often dismiss it. How can we show that Catholic sources are trustworthy while responding to media they view as scientific and factual?
That question has a lot of levels to it. So I think that religious sources are often reflective of the sources that publish them. So for example, if it is a Catholic media outlet, and there are many that are very, very good, you can say, you can start by sharing the news source. And if somebody challenges you, then go find a secular news source that is in agreement. If you cannot, then maybe you should recheck yourself. But I always advise you that if you are going to share something, you need to have seen it in multiple reliable places. So if, for example, I'm going to go back to the Disney and the drinking age, you can quickly go to Snopes and discredit that. You can also go to other news outlets and they'll tell you the story of how this disastrous thing happened. When you are working in real time, it's a little bit harder to do. But don't be afraid to share religious sources. Many times they are more accurate than a lot of others because they take their time. They are committed to big T truth, just like all of the rest of us are. The next thing is to verify your source and then share that verification with the person that has challenged you on that truth. But, it's the second piece of this is that we can't be afraid to shy away from our faith because it is from a faith-based place. We have to live our truth. We live unfortunately in a society where to speak of faith-based matters is almost frowned upon. It's, the scientific win. And, there's no conflict between the church and science. Honestly, if there were no church, there would be no science. We live in a world where everything is ultimately knowable because it was created with logic and order by a higher power that knows these things. And so there's no conflict between science and faith in its true sense. And so sometimes that little reminder can also be a helpful thing. But it's incumbent upon all of us to seek the truth and be judicious in our posting, and then respond with evidence that supports our posting, that is true and verifiable and well-resourced.
So everyone will receive a recording of today's segment, and Stephanie will share her contact information with me, that if you would like to continue a conversation with her on this topic, you can most certainly reach out to her. Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Your perspective has been inspiring and thought-provoking, and we truly appreciate your time and effort.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining and watching today. See you next time.